Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Shadowy Stories. Tonight at our spooky tavern, we bring you to strange tales from the Thomas Cogg archives. These two stories seem to have a subtle connection, even echoing previous tales from this series. Will you choose to keep your screen on to experience the thrill, or put on your headphones and let it lull you to sleep? The choice is yours. Now let the story begin. Many people may not understand the difference between an evolutionary biologist and a marine biologist. It's okay. Even my parents, as an evolutionary biologist, still can't tell the difference. So when I was invited to participate in a Norwegian biological project entirely at sea in 2017, the buoy project, I suspected the organizers had made a mistake. However, after my colleagues and I published a high-quality article on the electromagnetic effects on the environment in 2015, there hadn't been any significant academic achievements for 2 years, so I agreed to the buoy project. The organizers told me that the entire project would be conducted at the northern edge of the Norwegian Sea, north of Iceland. The project would be divided into 4 research teams, with 4 research vessels and constant patrols by the Coast Guard, and communication between the 2 teams would be strictly monitored and reviewed, very strict. Right, but I had just returned from an inexplicably cancelled Icelandic research project, so I had to seize this opportunity no matter what. Therefore, as a landlubber, I boldly stepped onto our team's ship for the first time, the Hydar. I had 5 colleagues, knowing I was prone to seasickness. They started reminding me on the first day that I might feel like I was going to overturn when the waves were high. At night, the temperature on the deck would drop to below 0, and I'd better pray that the heating system wouldn't malfunction. Thankfully, my partner, an Icelandic woman named Selma, took very good care of me. We helped each other in the endless icy sea and completed the first 36 hours of work, finally reaching the Hydar's 4th collective report. We sat in a metal conference room. Our supervisor, a man I had never met, set up a projector in front of the crew and said, "Do you know the term island biography? Everyone present nodded without a doubt. This type of biography refers to systems that have been largely isolated from other ecosystems for a long time, such as the Galapagos Islands." The man continued, "We have discovered an island biography area, and this is the next step in our research, which is why we have recruited experts from various fields." He sighed and said, "Well, but I hope you won't be afraid." I was still very confused and worried. Then he turned on the projector. The image was clear. It was a picture of the seabed at over 13.0 feet deep. A few weeks ago, a crustal change occurred in the sea area below our ship. The buoy project, supported by the Norwegian and Icelandic governments, restarted monitoring parts of the Norwegian Sea that we could observe via satellite images, which had started to turn black. After preliminary submersible research, we discovered an isolated microbial ecosystem submerged at around 14.0 feet, which had been hidden underground for millions of years and now, due to geological activity, had surfaced into the ocean. Just imagine, how many microorganisms would it take to stain several square miles of the ocean this black? As soon as he finished speaking, the scientists below began to murmur among themselves. The man showed more projected photos. The photos were of the Hydar's hull, but waves of black, thick, viscous substance were clinging to the ship's side. "We have already sent personnel to scrape off numerous samples of this viscous black substance," the man continued. "Now it's your turn to show your professional skills." Soon, a group of employees wearing a circle and a V-shaped pattern on their clothes walked in. Each of them carried glass containers filled with jars of the black substance. The entire room buzzed with excitement. Nils, from our team, was particularly exaggerated. He was almost screaming, saying he was curious to see what form the life forms buried deep in the seabed and evolving on their own for millions of years would take. He was right. but I always had a bad feeling, especially when the employees had placed the samples and began to collect our phones. My unease about this isolated research environment grew stronger. However, having signed the confidentiality agreement and contract, let's get to work. On the first night, we discovered at least 13 unknown species from the samples at hand, and were surprised to find that 90 of them were fungi living in the extreme high pressure of the deep sea. Just imagine, mushrooms hidden in the seabed. Quite interesting, isn't it? This was just the beginning. Then, the 4 teams conducted mutual checks and reports, and found that they had already found 37 different types of deep-sea fungi. The employees receiving the report also seemed quite satisfied. They even agreed to send down deep-sea cameras and diving teams for further sampling. In this way, a week passed slowly. All the discoveries amazed us. The only unpleasant experience might have been the patrols of the guards coming and going. I began to realize that they didn't seem like Coast Guard personnel directly sent by the Norwegian or Icelandic governments. The symbol on each employee's uniform was not a circle and a V. The V was actually 2 short-handled axes. What did it mean? Did relevant authorities entrust some unknown social group to imprison us at sea to conduct research? It's just that, except for being very serious during working hours, they were very friendly at other times. Herman, the guard I was closest to, would even make tuna salad and mayonnaise for us during mealtimes, which eased my vigilance. At the beginning of the second week, we began receiving strange reports. Nils's team reported that they had detected a metal in most of the fungi, but the geologist from Team 3 couldn't identify the substance. That geologist must be scared of the stars above his head at night, being so nervous. It's no wonder his professional abilities aren't normal. Unexpectedly, our supervisor was quite excited. He even named the metal Immaculate Mole, saying that for these creatures to be able to develop and evolve in such deep waters, they needed a flamboyant and impressive name. Immediately afterwards, we discovered Immaculate Mole in larger life forms, a tiny deep-sea fish smaller than a thumbnail. Black all over, eyeless, but covered in Immaculate Mole. However, in my research results, I judged that this fish might not have looked like this initially. Were they affected by something that changed them like this? After 2 weeks, we were all used to the research work on the Haidar, and the team members and the guards had become familiar with each other, and communication was more convenient. Although Selma and I were still checking the material salvaged by the divers day and night, we still hadn't found anything more amazing or mysterious than the Immaculate Mole. In the 4th week, things suddenly started to go wrong. The sticklebacks in our aquarium showed unsettling changes. 1. Their numbers decreased. 2. With the filter working normally, the water in the aquarium became increasingly dark. 3. They began circling a larger female fish, which ate them one by one. Within 2 days, the large female fish became the last surviving fish in the entire tank. And at the same time, the water in the tank turned murky and dark due to the rapid reproduction of fungi. I immediately reported this to my supervisor and requested tests on the fungal growth rate, but Selma focused on another point instead of the fungi. Shouldn't we focus on the effect of Immaculate Mole on organisms? So we split up. While I researched the fungi, Selma asked Team 2 for a whole cube of Immaculate Mole they had extracted and assembled. Unexpectedly, this thing reflected extremely strong light, and prolonged direct viewing could even damage eyesight. In addition, it had an extremely high heat absorption capacity and electrical conductivity far exceeding gold and copper. Selma and Team 2's findings focused everyone's attention on Immaculate Mole, which gave me ample time and space to conduct my tests. But one morning in the 5th week, when I arrived at the laboratory, the last remaining female stickleback had disappeared. The aquarium lid was open, and a long trail of black viscous liquid was left on the ground. Finally, I found it at the other end of the laboratory. It was wriggling on the ground, as if trying to swim on the ground, slowly approaching another aquarium containing sticklebacks. Terrified, I immediately had the guard kill it. But the autopsy revealed an even more unsettling feature. The fish's eyes had disappeared. Its bones had rotted into a black paste, and its entire physiological structure had become like a jelly. But it tested positive for a large amount of immaculate mole, especially in its brain. Now I was even more certain of my earlier conjecture. Inhaling the fungi could be very dangerous. In the previous 2 weeks, they were unlucky, so during this period we all wore gas masks. But it seemed to be too late. Accidents followed one after another. The diving team said they couldn't continue diving, as some divers' suits were burned by strange dark jellyfish, and some even suffered severe poisoning and went into shock. It was hard not to suspect that the normally functioning animals in the water had also been affected. In the 6th week, the sky began to flash with lightning and thunder, and the rain poured down incessantly. However, while looking through the porthole, I saw a large number of strangely behaving seabirds. They stubbornly continued flying in the lightning and thunder, but seemed to be attacking their own kind. As expected, in those few days, our guards found many seagull carcasses pecked to pieces on the deck. Their feathers were charred black, and their flesh rotten, like jelly. Except for the guards, all our researchers were gathered in the conference room by the supervisor for a short meeting, requiring us to stay indoors from that day on. The supervisor told us that the current storm was very unusual. A pitch-black cloud hung over us, and the raindrops were unusually large and viscous. Even the guards were not allowed to leave the room except to clean up the seabird carcasses on the deck. He was right. At this moment, the clouds in the sky were pitch black, even forming a porous texture, like a giant furry creature throwing its black hair at our research vessel. The guards returning from outside cursed and took off their clothes in the corridor. Apparently, the strange rainwater gradually hardened, making it difficult to remove their clothes. So Herman, who was first to remove his equipment, hastily took off almost all his equipment in front of everyone and began to scrape off the rotten and black parts of his body with his army knife. Besides the guards, some scientists also showed changes in their bodies. Nils started to complain about a stinging, salty sensation in his eyes. He decided to lock himself in the bathroom, but I could hear him vomiting repeatedly in the bathroom, which reminded me of our sticklebacks, and a bad feeling swept over me again. Sure enough, Selma soon found that I had black viscous substance on the back of my neck, in my blind spot. She quickly put on protective clothing and a mask to clean me. By the time this was done, it was almost 11:30 a.m. The sky outside was completely covered by dark clouds, as if it were midnight. Suddenly, a scream of extreme terror came from the main deck. Selma instinctively looked out, but quickly looked away. She looked at me and said, "There's something in the water." After hearing this, I looked out, but only for a second. Selma quickly pulled me away. In that second, I saw thousands of points of light floating in the dark water outside the ship, like countless underwater spotlights. It can't be wrong. It's the reflection of the immaculate mole. If I'm not mistaken, there are thousands of creatures under our ship, watching us. Selma and I locked ourselves in the team's laboratory, hiding under waterproof fabric, until around 1 p.m. when we heard several gunshots, followed by someone rushing back from the main deck, with at least 6 others behind him. When Selma turned to see what was going on, we saw Herman, disheveled, holding a gun, pointing it at 6 of our other team members. Nils was at the front. His face was completely black, especially around his eye sockets, where there were no eyes. "Back off," Herman yelled, "or I'll shoot." Those people did not retreat but moved closer, moaning and wailing. Soon they grabbed Herman, forcing the guard to fire. I covered Selma's ears and eyes, hugging her tightly in panic. I could hear roars, screams, cries, and occasional gunshots outside the wall. They were begging Herman to kill them, forcing him to stuff their flesh into his mouth. Herman was putting up a last-ditch fight. After about half an hour of resistance, everything fell silent. I could no longer hear their wails, only the last few words of thanks, thanking Herman for fulfilling their wishes. A few hours later, we heard the sound of a helicopter, and the sound of the rain disappeared, but we still didn't dare to move. Selma and I were blindfolded and carried onto a nearby Coast Guard ship. They spoke Icelandic, pushed us into a sealed room, and performed various examinations, from our skin to our blood, from our feet to our teeth. Finally, they removed our blindfolds and kept me in the room in isolation for a week before finally releasing me. I didn't try to find any of my colleagues, didn't ask our supervisor, didn't pay attention to any news about the buoy project, but I knew the project was still ongoing because after returning to my university, I read a report about satellite images showing a large number of black spots in the ocean currents. Yes, the fungal colony was still moving. The northern coast of Iceland even carried out emergency evacuation and relocation after a large black spot appeared. Of course, it was called earthquake prevention locally, but the coincidence in time and my experience told me my judgment was right. What concerned me most was the strange changes in the Hydar's crew. They didn't become extremely aggressive, but begged to be killed or eaten. This phenomenon appeared not only on that ship. I had seen a similar incident in a strange Steam game. If I have the chance, I will tell you later. Later, I decided to look up the research article by the colleague I worked with in 2015, because I remembered that he had also joined a team whose research object had very strange material characteristics, extremely similar to the immaculate mole I discovered in the seabed. The world is so small, isn't it? But not only could I not find the research content he mentioned, but all his contact information was also invalid. Just like the colleagues on the Hydar, he disappeared from my life. From 2018 to 2019, even without paying attention to the buoy project, I was still tracking the satellite images of the large black spots. They were moving, starting from the coasts of Norway and Iceland and gradually moving south, even passing over Ireland and the UK. According to my prediction, they would reach the coast of Newfoundland and the waters beyond the strait, Lawrence Bay, by the end of 2021. To be more specific, I'll show you this satellite image from last September. At that time, they had already reached south of the Greenland coast, not far from the American continent. Written on March 11, 2021. My check. Hello? Can you hear me? I've started recording. Sorry, I can't see if my recording has started. I have to check. Now, let's talk about my experience. I completed my doctoral studies and postdoctoral research at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm and the University of Bern in Switzerland, majoring in electromagnetic interference and the practical application of electromedicine. If you try to search for these keywords online, a related paper by my colleagues and me in 2015 may appear on the webpage. That was the highlight of my academic career, even my life, because less than a year later, I was about to attend a conference in Copenhagen, but encountered an electrical fault in the short-term rental apartment where I stayed overnight. The steam from the water heater exploded and almost hit my entire face. My last impression was a flash of light, followed by endless darkness. After that, I had to undergo eye removal surgery, as my right eye, 8 teeth, most of my nose bridge, and 20 of the skin on my right arm were damaged. I remember it was very painful. After 18 hours of facial reconstruction surgery, I underwent months of cosmetic surgery, facial examinations, and systemic treatment. The result wasn't perfect. It was even very bad. But unwilling to give up, I finally emerged from the shadows in 2018, started learning Braille, and even tried to use Braille to understand the new developments in my former field of research. In the autumn of 2019, a man suddenly came to Sweden and contacted me. He told me that he was now an employee of a renewable energy research group, and he was inviting me to join their research team. This team was very special. Not only were all the scientists in the laboratory disabled, but they were all blind, so everyone was equipped with several personal assistants and had very high salaries and disability benefits. It was like a gift from heaven, because I was studying relevant information about new energy at that time. So I readily agreed. He also returned to Norway after signing the project contract with me. Less than a week later, I was also arranged to fly to Norway on a private plane. On the plane, I was formally introduced to my personal assistant, Mila, judging from his accent. He should be an Australian. He must have received very systematic training before picking me up, because sometimes I might just raise my hand or smack my lips, and he already guessed what I needed: serving tea and water, passing a cane, etc. Meticulous and attentive. And Milo was very talkative, which made me much more at ease on this rare solo trip. However, once I asked why all the scientists in our laboratory were blind, he always avoided the question or changed the subject. It seems there are some secrets I need to explore myself. Did you hear that? I think something is wrong. I need to hurry up and tell you. The first few days were spent on the job training and getting to know each other. I realized that besides me, there were almost 50 other blind employees, from scientists to research assistants. The team leader, Samir, told us that they were developing a new type of material, using a new type of metal, the material of which was unique and very bright. Prolonged contact could cause blindness, which was why they formed such a team. And our experimental results were exactly as he said. This metal material had a very strong reflectivity. The cube we had on hand was not natural, but synthetically extracted. My assistant told me that this cube could not only absorb light, but also absorb electricity, low-level radiation, and radio waves. I swear I've never seen such a strange thing in all my years of research. In a later accident, we even found that the window pane could absorb sound waves. Oh, window pane. That's the name we later gave this metal. After absorbing sound waves, it reflected them back after a few seconds, and the feeling was like a delayed and slightly distorted echo. But it was also after this discovery that a scientist named Holger fell ill. Samir quickly realized that our workload might be a little too high, especially the night shift. After all, people need rest at work. He decided to give everyone a week's paid holiday after the last night shift the next day. However, on this last night shift, at about 11:15 p.m., Malin, an assistant in the next laboratory, accidentally caused a power system failure. At that time, they were conducting a pressure test on the window pane. Alan suddenly bumped into some volatile substances while transporting something, which reminded me of the nightmare of 2016. But luckily there was no explosion that night. Only the entire room was immediately sealed, and the power was automatically cut off in an emergency. In a few seconds, the room quickly became cold. I guess it was because after the continuous supply of heating stopped, the window pane began to absorb the residual heat. Then came a strange greeting from the doorway. Hello. This distorted echo was unsettling. My other blind colleague, Gertrude, just optimistically replied, The voice quickly replied to Gertrude, but this time it was accompanied by crackling footsteps and knocking on our laboratory door. Because of the special situation just now, all the automatic doors were closed, but something seemed to be trying to break in. The voice became more anxious and louder. If the window pane absorbs and then bounces back the sound wave, does this mean it's getting closer to us? The airlock above our heads began to creak, with a grating metallic sound. I pressed myself against the wall, grabbed my assistant Mila's arm, and held my breath. Suddenly, the power was restored, all the automatic doors opened, and I began to hear screams and alarms. A mechanical broadcast was also looping. Evacuation protocol initiated. Please proceed to the safety zone at Gate 1. Evacuation protocol initiated. In the chaotic escape, I heard footsteps coming from the opposite direction. At the head of the group of people walking against the flow was clearly Samir, who was shouting at the people coming in. You short-lived fools. Answer me. I'll go to the innermost part. I heard various Nordic languages echoing and responding. I was led away from the experimental area by my assistant, but was suddenly asked to take off all my clothes, take off my glasses, and undergo an emergency full-body check and cleaning. I must say it was very cold at that time. By the time Mila brought me back to the apartment, about 2 hours had passed, and I stopped trembling. Or was I trembling because of fear? But Mila told me that we should never discuss our laboratory work with each other under any circumstances. It was at that moment that I suspected that my apartment had been bugged. As expected, I was fired after a week, the only consolation being that I received 4 months' salary, my full salary and compensation. I remember on the flight home, Mila was crying. Believe me, he wasn't sad to see me go. He was afraid of something. After that, I went home smoothly, but I don't know what happened to him. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because tonight, while brushing my teeth, my house lost power. At that moment, I held my breath again and said nothing. This is not only because of my experience in the Buoy Project laboratory, but also because I remembered Gertrude, who seemed to be the only missing person after that night. As a blind person, my hearing and sense of touch are actually more sensitive than you might imagine, especially in a small space like a bathroom. I quickly realized that something was making a noise in my mirror. Yes, when I slowly reached out to the mirror, I found it was slightly warm. No, it wasn't the mirror that was warm, but the uneven decorative ornaments on the frame were warm. However, I don't remember my mirror frame having so many inlays. After all, I can't appreciate them with my naked eyes. And the next second, the mirror frame I touched made a sound. The 2 strange tales tonight are over. Shadowy Stories suggests using them with previous stories from the Thomas Cogg archives for even better effect. How many connections did you discover in the tales? In the future, I will continue to bring new stories in this series. If you like them, don't forget to like and leave a message to let me know. Then, see you next time. The tavern is closing. Good night, everyone.